Oh, yep.
Okay, so I'm just gonna go quickly through the rules and goals for today, and then we'll pass it over to our speakers. Our goal today is to learn how to communicate effectively across cultures. It's just really important, especially in like today's world, to know how to do that properly. And the goal for all of our sessions is to kind of give the students tools to be a successful like organizer. And then our group rules, just respect, no identifiers, one mic, be mindful of others' time, step up, step down, and then just have fun. We really, really appreciate you guys being here, and pass it over to Elizabeth.
Yeah. Awesome. So, oh, I can never do these transitions. I always struggle with them. So to reiterate, like our goal today is to really bridge differences between communication skills and learning those skills when working with people who come from different backgrounds and different cultures than us, and really being able to work together to create an inclusive coalition. So we have two speakers today, both are Suffolk alum, and so we have Destiny, who will share his experience first. He was the former director of constituent service for the mayor of Brockton, and then also he currently is the corporate partnership associate at the Boston Medical Center. So I will let him take it away and until about 7:20.
All right. Good evening, everyone. My name is Destiny Ihenancho, and I am like Elizabeth said, I am a graduate of 2018. My grad program was in political science, and I really did enjoy my time there. So I hope that each and every one of you walk away with something tangible from Suffolk University. One of the things that I must say in this time that we live in is you've got to be clear, you've got to be concise, and you have to have a mission. In order to achieve whatever you want to achieve, whatever you put your mind to, it is achievable. However, you've got to be direct, you've got to know what you want. And there's so many ways to communicate that to employers, to networks, to potential partners and whatnot. So one of the things that I really struggled with was being able to, I guess one thing I struggled with was just being able to be clear in the beginning and whatever came my way. And in this sense of just trying to have that experience, grow my experience, I kind of just went with anything. And it came to backfire upon me because they could see, employers could see, people who have done it for a long time could see that they can sense the willingness to just do anything. And sometimes it can be taken out of context. For those of us who like to just learn, who want to grow our experience in everything that we put our hands in, it can be taken out of context. So you've got to be mindful of how you present yourself, and especially in today's world. Um, Boston isn't, and forgive me for saying this, for those of us who love Boston and love it dearly, but Boston isn't immune to racism or implicit racism. So for those of us that look like me, it's difficult, especially when you're, coming out of school. You know that the odds are stacked against you. That's why it's so important that I've learned and I've grown into that, of just being able to say, this is what I want and this is what I won't settle for. This is what I'll settle for instead. Being able to just know what that is, it takes time, but when it comes, it will be very clear. So, and I'll use an experience when I worked at the State House for a state rep. I had just finished up my grad program at Suffolk University, and I was excited. I just jumped right into as an intern, and one thing led to another through networking, and people could see how passionate I was about constituent services, about just being able to talk to people in different districts and just kind of get their problems solved. However, when it came time for negotiating for a salary, I didn't put up a fight, and it became like one of those things where I was just like, they felt like, you know, I was just like an anything goes kind of guy. But deep down inside, I had a mission. Deep down inside, I said, this is not where I really want to be. But I had just finished school. I didn't have that patience. I didn't apply myself to other opportunities that I knew I deserved, and that I knew that I could get. And part of that was just saying like, well, I'm gonna walk into an office and they're gonna think I'm a female because of my name, because it's real. It's happened, and it happens. They're gonna not want to hire me because they're not able to say my last name. It happens. It has happened. But after a while, you've got to be able to say, like, for instance, when I get introduced nowadays and people say Ihenancho or Injaro, I said, no, it's Destiny Ihenancho. You've got to be firm. You're not being rude. You're just being firm. You're being concise. You need to know that you also too, you're looking for work, you're looking for opportunities, but at the same time, you deserve some atom of respect. Nowadays, when they tell me like we could go far into the interview and they'll say, well, we're offering you X, Y, and Z. But I know I'm more qualified than that. I know that I put my time into both my undergrad and my graduate program. Therefore, I deserve X, Y, and Z. So this is what I'm sticking to. And sometimes you just got to walk away from an opportunity. As much as it's going to be a great thing for you to grow in that experience, you've got to also put your foot forward. You've got to put your foot down sometime and say, no, this is what I'm worth. And sometimes when you do take that role, for those of us who come out of school and we need to pay bills immediately, help out family, I understand. But sometimes you've got to like demonstrate what you're worth and ask your boss or ask your employer and say, hey, I've been doing X, Y, and Z for 2 years now, and I think I deserve a raise. Sorry, I know I deserve a raise. So sometimes just having that, just being brave enough to walk up and say, this is what I'm doing. And again, in a time that we live in where people are so maybe a little sensitive about having certain conversations because of what the backlash may be, what the result might come out to be. You've got to be a brave soul and just find a medium to probably have that conversation. So my advice and from my experience is do not let excitement overrun you. It sounds like a good opportunity, but take the time to actually read, ask questions. Ask questions. I knowing what I know now, I would have asked much more questions during the interview process. I would have done my research a little bit more than just seeing what's on the internet. Networking is very key. Networking is a double-edged sword. Let me explain why. Because networking, yes, you grow your network, but you get to also study other people's cultures. You get to see how they really interact with you. Certain words don't mean exactly what it comes out as. So just being able to understand what the language is, what they're truly trying to say, it really does help. So taking the time to just be patient, the right opportunity will come. Don't ever feel like you have to sell yourself short just because you are deep down, you may be desperate, but at the same time, you've got to be more knowledgeable about what you're getting yourself into. Study the body language, hear what they really say when they say certain things. So I could go on and on about that, but for those of us who are just coming out of college, who are looking to expound on our opportunities, I definitely encourage you to take the time to study these different industries. I definitely encourage you to hone yourself and just be proud of who you are. Never let anyone underestimate you. Never let anybody sell you short just because. Don't sell yourself short because they can't say your name. They they can't, you know, they can't look at you the same way they look at others. I have left jobs behind because I was uncomfortable with the way I was being treated. Now, in hindsight, should I had a conversation? Probably. Being able to say I'd like to have a conversation for those employers or those people who are your mentors, if they really want to, they will listen. If they truly value you, they will change. They will probably reshuffle the way things are done for your sake. These things are things that I learned a bit late, but I'm glad that they happened because I would not be able to talk about it with you all as I am today. So I say all this just to say, be proud, hone your skills. And for those of us who aren't sure what we want yet, it's okay to dibble dabble. It is okay. It's like life is like a buffet. So you may like something, it's not what it seems at first. It's okay to walk away. Don't let ever anybody tell you, well, your resume looks a little skimpy. Why'd you spend 2 years here? You don't owe anybody an explanation. You don't even have to put it on your resume. But you've taken that thing you've learned from there, and you've moved on to the next thing. But as you go along, don't repeat the same things from your previous experience. If it's something that led to a communication issue, learn from it. Learn from it. And sometimes different cultures may not they may not mesh. You may misunderstand someone. Sometimes it's just good to go for a walk. Nowadays, what I do is I say, hey, for example, hey, Elizabeth, at your availability, is it okay if I just walk with you down to grab some lunch? And you're able to just have that one-on-one rather than being in a space where you're calling someone out in the middle of the office, right? Because sometimes we have that tendency to want to prove that we can do, we too can blow up. Sometimes it's not worth it. But having that one-on-one conversation with that person you're having an issue with, having a one-on-one conversation with your mentors and your peers, just to understand how would they do it, it really does help. So again, I am going to leave you guys with this quote that I go by, and I really mean it. It takes a few seconds to say hello and forever to say goodbye. And what it means to me is sometimes we come across people that we never knew how they could change our lives, be it for the better or for the worse. So never take any experience for granted. Never take anything that you do and just say, well, I guess that was an experience. Own that experience and use it to better yourself for the next opportunity. Use that experience you've learned to teach the next person behind you, so that people don't make the same mistake you do. And if you know you could be a mentor in your community, a leader in your community, these keys that you have, that you possess now, called experience, will open up doors for others. So I know I spoke all over the place, but please feel free. I don't know, Elizabeth, I don't know, Sieta, if you can put my contact out there. I'd be more than happy to connect with Suffolk alums or Suffolk students who are looking to find different opportunities, whether it be in the private sector, whether it be in the government sector. I'd be more than happy to use my contacts just to see if we can open doors. And I really mean that. I spent some time in Washington, D.C., spent about 4 years in a nonprofit, which I still have a tight relationship called US PAC, US Pan Asian American Chamber of Commerce, out in like DuPont Circle. Great place to be if you're looking for any experience. Please use me at your availability, and I'm more than happy to connect with anyone. Thank you all.
Thank you so much. I don't know if you have time right now to take any questions, or should we come back later?
Oh, absolutely. If there's questions, please go ahead.
Okay. Does anyone want to ask any questions right now? I know I have one. Feel free to drop it in the chat. And so my question is, for like people in marginalized groups, how do you kind of gain that confidence, or like, how do you go about that? Because I've asked for like a raise, and like I was lucky that it was a woman-owned like POC company, so I felt like very comfortable, doing that, but I don't think I would in other places. So yeah, if you have an answer for that.
It's a great question. That is a very good question. So you've got to, like I said, I think it's about having confidence. And sometimes you've got to put it on the line. And I really mean that. You've got to put it on the line. I've been doing this for a certain amount of time, and I really do feel like I deserve a raise. This is what I bring to the table. And what I do, I wish I had it with me here. I have a portfolio of things that I do in an office. I build it, whatever I do, it could be put in together in an Excel sheet, right? Because some companies value that. It could be putting together um a a document that shows raise appraisals or whatever the case is. It could be writing a speech. It could be creating something for presentations for your boss. Now, without you, you know that that presentation would have been a flop. You know that you put the work in and you've been doing this for some time. You know that you're reliable. So ask for it. And if they don't, again, I think they're missing the point. And sometimes you've just got to just say, well, if well, obviously you've got to line yourself up with something first, right? And just tell them like I found something, and just give them the reason. This is not paying what I needed to be paying me for my skills, for what I've gone through as a student or as a grad student, and X, Y, and Z. So don't I wouldn't for me I found it unsuccessful to bring up the issue of black and white. It's your skills. You've got these skills, because no matter what, if you put it in a different skin, it would still be the same issue. That's just me. um I got a question here that says, how do you go about networking? um it's not easy, because sometimes you've got to be very open to discussions, having different different characters to talk to. You've got to just be willing to put yourself on the line and start off with a handshake. Well, not a handshake nowadays, but start off with just saying, introducing yourself and saying, "Hey, my name is Destiny. And I'm looking to have you as a mentor. I really like what you, and of course, you've done your research by this time. I see that you're in business for more than 25 years. You've been an executive. You've been in the C-suite business, and I too want to see myself there. Is there any way we could set up a partnership or a program? Is there a program that your company has that I can volunteer my time to, or just come around?" So it does help. Um, and sometimes you may just get a no. You may get a no. You may get oh, we'll be in touch, but they'll never contact you. If they do give you a card, it's gold mine. Use it right away. I'm talking like right away. I'm talking like within the hour. We just met, and I really, really liked our conversation, even though you didn't like it, but you want to be somewhere, right? You've got this mission. You reach out and just give him that your availability, and say, "This is my time. I would like to make sure that I learn from you. What do you offer? Or who else could I talk to? Could you open another door? Could you introduce me to someone else that you think may be above my right up my alley?" So these are things that I've done, and it's worked out. Sometimes it's been a no call, no show type of deal. I've been on Capitol Hill just waiting for them at their office, and they had to reschedule. But you don't give up. You ask the chief of staff, like, "Hey, so since I'm here, is there another person I can talk to that could point me in the right direction, or X, Y, and Z, or the legislative aid, or just yeah." It's tough, but it's doable, because I'm talking from experience.
I have a quick question, Destiny, and maybe this is building off of your previous answers. Now, something that something that I think can be really challenging for students is when they're doing community work, is building trust in different communities, and kind of especially across communities of difference. And what sort of tips or what sort of ways have you found in some of your community work that's been helpful to build trust in different kinds of communities? Maybe some of your work in DC, or some of your work otherwise as well. Like what do you think students could, what kind of advice would you give students for building that trust?
Sure. So in everybody that you'll meet, Adam, I'm pretty sure if you and I sat down together and talked, we'll have some similarities. It could be we like the same type of ties. It could be that we like coffee. It could be that you like the Red Sox and I like the Yankees, which is not true, but it could be anything. So finding that, just taking the time just to listen, And then you'll find it, and for those of us who like constituent services, you'll understand when people talk, you'll figure out like, oh wow, we have the same thing going on. I can't tell you during the time of COVID, when it was at its height, I would get so many phone calls at the mayor's office. I don't have X, Y, and Z. I don't have this, and um, I haven't been able to do this. I can't eat. I haven't been able to eat because I don't have any food. There's been a time in each of our lives that we didn't have something, that we weren't able to make ends meet. Using that personal connection, using that personal touch of yours. Well, when I was hungry, what did I do? Now I have these resources at my disposable that are disposable to me. I can say, you know what? We have charity guilds for we have charity guilds as a provider or as a go-to resource, but they can be overbooked and overwhelmed. Where else would I go? Where else did I go? I've gotten phone calls that, hey, I can't pay our bill this month. And what do? You can't give them a source that's overstretched. So what, like, hey, you talk them through it, like, hey, so I don't have the resources right now. We don't have the resources right now. We've run out of funds for X, Y, and Z. However, let me make a phone call. Let me see what I can do. And sometimes making that phone call for them, putting them in touch with the person who can actually help, it's everything. So to your question, Adam, it's really just taking the time to listen. You'll find some type of connectivity with them. You'll find some type of something that links the two of you together. Sometimes it's the most odd thing in the world, but there's something there. Trust me.
Awesome, thanks. So I heard you say, really listen, and also, maybe sharing a story, right, about a personal experience, or showing a little bit of vulnerability can be a way to start to build that trust as well. That's great. Thank you.
No worries at all.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Destiny's email is in the chat if anyone wants to, reach out to him and contact him. Destiny, if you want anything else like out there, feel free to just drop it in the chat. Thank you so much for talking about your experience. We're gonna pass it on to our next speaker, Lina.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Thank you, Destiny, for all of that. I echo everything that you just said. So my name is Lina Cañon. These two graphics here are just a little bit to show you about the work that I currently do. So on the right, we have the Nerd Collective's Instagram, which is my company that we've launched to bring first generation entrepreneurs the resources that they need to launch businesses. And then on the left or the bottom, you can see the Chica Project, which is the nonprofit where I'm the associate director. And I am lucky enough that in both of my roles, I get to do cross-cultural communication in many ways, not just community building, but through social media, through personal relationships, through the communities that we target. And so the way that I'm a very interactive person, so I vibe off the room. So if you can turn off your camera, I would encourage you to, because that will add to the vibe. But if not, you could just send me snaps or whatever in the chat to keep the momentum going. So we can go to the next slide. And what I have for you all is just a set of tips. And then after I kind of go through them, you can all ask questions. And so my first one is kind of the do's. And the first one is knowing your audience. I think in any scenario, whether you are building a campaign or talking to anyone, you have to ask yourself, like, who am I talking to? Who am I trying to reach? Do you know what that community feels like? If any of you are thinking of running for office or helping a campaign or volunteering for a campaign, once you start doing that, it gets really specific to communities, right? So right now we're going to have a big mayoral campaign happening. We're going to have some district campaigns happening. The biggest question is, who are their audience? What does Boston look like? What does that Boston district look like? And do we know that? So my first do is know your audience. Next is have a team, right? So if you're the one that's thinking of running for office, it really does take a village. So you have to figure out, you, as wonderful as you may be as an individual, you cannot do it all yourself. And this is something that I have learned even while doing my work, that I am only as good as the people that I surround myself with. And so who can support you in this, right? In your efforts to either volunteer or to run your own campaign or to create relationships with your community. The other thing that I found that is super beneficial from having a team is that you don't know what you don't know, right? And I know before that people used to tell me that, and I'm like, that doesn't even make sense to me. But now I'm like, oh, I get it. Like there is my vision, my tunnel vision, there is my peripheral, and then there's what I have no idea that is even going on. And that's where your team comes in, because if you surround yourself with a strong and diverse team that is also culturally sensitive, they'll be putting you on to the things that you don't know. One example of this is my co-partner in my business is from India. And I remember when we started having our company and we were launching, she was like, Ramadan is coming up, like all of these holidays that I had no idea what they were. And I was like, hold up, like, let's have a conversation around this, because this wasn't even in my vantage point. I'm a first generation immigrant from Colombia who had never been exposed to the Middle East until I came to this country. And so again, you don't know what you don't know. And it's really good to have a team that can support you in learning. All right, the next one is access. And so when you think about community building, or when you think about reaching an audience or making connections, to some of the questions that came up today, is, are you making the communication that you have accessible? And that is something that is so important. And even right now, as I'm speaking, I'm wary of the fact that I didn't ask any of you if you spoke a different language, if you needed closed captions, and that is something that is really important, especially right now, is to make sure that all of your communication has access to all of the community. You can't really say you're cross-cultural if you're not creating access for other cultures to see what you mean. And so that is also understanding the norms of a community, right? What do native speakers use? Are people proofreading the language that you are using? Are you using captions in your videos? Do you have representation in your social media and in your circle? One great example of this was AOC, who went on Instagram and was like breaking down a bill that she had just, tried to pass. And she was using common language, what I would say is common language, right? Usually when you watch C-SPAN or you see politicians speak, they're using language that you're like, hold up, I got to write this down and go like look it up later. But the ability to be able to go on Twitch or whatever app you go to and just talk to people normally and say, hey, this is what's going on, this is what this bill is, created access for so many people who would have been turned off to that type of dialogue, right? And then my last do is always check your intention versus your impact, especially when it comes to cross-cultural communication. Now, again, I'm from Colombia, and when I say a certain word, even in Spanish, right? And my intention is to say the word as Colombians know it, somebody from another Latin American country could read that very differently. And so it may impact them differently. And I think there's been a big movement lately to really check ourselves when it comes to intent and impact, especially around culture, race, gender. It doesn't really matter what you meant at the end of the day. What matters is how that person felt and the impact that your words had on them. So it's really important, for you to kind of check yourself, right? Cancel culture is very real. I'm sure a lot of you have seen it on social media. And it's really about, if your intentions are rooted in good and your vision and your mission, you have to also ask yourself, am I making people feel inclusive? Is my intention showing up with the impact that I'm doing? So a way to do that is start collecting feedback, right? Like, did I make you feel this way? Did I achieve my objective? My intention was to have this be positive. Was it positive? And then accept the feedback that they give you. The other tip that I would say for intent versus impact is, how are you addressing your own biases? And again, like, this has been a big conversation, especially this past year, but check yourself, right? I think we all have internal biases, and you don't have to then go and do an apology and tell the world what your biases were. But as long as you're constantly doing that work internally and with your team, growth is really part of the human experience. So I think that smashes cancel culture. So I'm going to stop there and see if there are any questions about the do's before I go to the don'ts. Okay, awesome. I don't see anything. Great. So a couple of don'ts. And we can go to the first one. So the first one is don't ever assume. And there is, that saying, like, when you assume, you don't do a great job. And it has been a lesson that I have learned over and over again, even when I assume things that I think are positive, right? Like I'm assuming X, Y, and Z about people, and that's a highlight. But no, don't ever assume. Don't assume anything about gender, about culture. Don't assume anything about education. And I cannot stress that enough. I think the way to prevent yourself from assuming things is to always lead with questions. Present yourself as an inquisitive person, as a curious person, and instead of saying, so what Latin American country are you from? You could say, are you from a Latin American country? Or where are you from? Even better, where are you from? Again, framing everything as a question rather than immediately pushing your assumption on someone just opens so many doors and immediately creates a positive atmosphere. This is something that me and my co-leader also talk about all the time, which is she's learning about me and I'm learning about her, and we're both learning about our very different cultures. And we constantly come back to the root value that is, we are lifelong learners. That is what we're doing. You will never be a know-it-all. There is no person in the world knows it all. And so one thing that we say is we are always a student, never a master. And as we're learning, that also allows us to learn with humility and grace for each other, right? Because sometimes, and especially right now, when everything is so polarized, people will hold you accountable for not knowing something. Like, there's Google, you could have just Googled it, but you have to show up with grace for people's learning and where they're at in their own learning curve about other people's cultures. My other don't is the isms. And this, it's kind of self-explanatory, but if you're not conscious of it, be conscious of the isms, which are racism, sexism, ageism. And if you don't and haven't heard of these or don't know these, I highly encourage you to look them up, because it is something that you will face, especially as college students and graduating. You will face ageism. And I think Destiny talked about this a little bit, that people will just think like, oh, this person is young and unexperienced. And that is something you could say, hey, like, let's unpack that together. I actually feel like I have a lot of experience. And again, to what Destiny was hitting at, is own who you are and be able to dismantle these isms that exist out there. I think the other layer to isms is knowing the historical context of this country. This country is very diverse. There are I have never been to a country that has so many cultures represented within it. Trust me, it is truly, truly a quote unquote melting pot. But with that comes historical context for every cultural group. And it is really important that as you create your campaigns or your relationships or start building community, that you educate yourself on those historical contexts as well. And I know right now there's a really big movement about the Asian community and people wanting to educate themselves and unearthing the history that we for so long have turned a blind spot to, about the historical immigration of Asians into America, and then the progression of Asian Americans, right? And so you don't want to wait for something like that to happen to educate yourself. You want to be proactive, and if you know your audience, you know where to tackle, what history books to tackle, or what to Google. My next don't is monoliths. And I actually had to look up this word. So it's okay if you also have to look it up, because people have been using this word a lot. And I'm like, what does it mean? But it does fully capture what I wanted to tell you all, which is that the human experience is not a monolith, right? It is not like one thing that's only made up of one thing. The human experience is actually made up of many things. It is super complex. It is nuanced, culture is so nuanced, and especially for our generation, like culture is constantly evolving and redefining itself. So that's something that we're doing with my company, is we're redefining what it means to be first generation. And first generation, usually people think, oh, it's the first person to go to college. And if they don't think that, then they think, oh, it's the first person that immigrated here. But the first generation experience is so much bigger than that. And the youth are redefining it. They're saying, actually, I'm the first to leave a Mormon community. I'm the first to come out as trans to my family. I'm the first, and that in itself encompasses first generation. And so as you acknowledge that the human experience is so nuanced and that we can redefine the terms that we use to speak with each other, you will find that you'll create much more genuine relationships with your community, with your constituents, with whoever you're trying to reach. Even when we try to categorize, I think that's the other really big movement that's happening right now, that whatever you fill out, right, people want to know what's the diversity numbers. Can you check off the ethnicity box, the race box? And there is a really big movement about trying to, as we categorize ourselves and own who we are and our identity, at the same time, kind of break those barriers down and understand that it is so nuanced, and that truly we're all really multicultural and evolving to a truly multicultural society. And then my last don't is to own your biases. So don't hide from them. Don't act like you don't have them. We all absolutely do. We live in this country. We are living in 2021. So by default, we've got some biases. And as long as you're working on yourself, you're staying honest to your mission, you're staying connected to your truth, and you're checking yourself, right? Being really honest with yourself, and you have a team that holds you accountable, that will really lead to success. And I think an example of this recently that I wanted to share with you all is how to not be afraid to do that for others, right? When you see someone else make a mistake or say something that is not culturally sensitive. So one of the examples is, I was in a class recently where we were talking about HIV and AIDS and what happened in the continent of Africa when that came out. And a lot of people started using the word poor countries when referring to this continent. And it was a really huge learning opportunity, because it could have gone so many ways, right? Like there are so many scenarios of how we could have tackled that. But the way that it was tackled was, somebody said, hey, I want to encourage people to use different wording because poor countries, has this impact on me, and here's an alternative that we could use. And the way that that was received was so beautiful. Like the professor immediately apologized, right? Acknowledged that her intent did not meet the impact that it had, reworded the way that we were framing things, and then later touched base with the whole group about what a learning experience that was for everyone. And so that type of humility and the ability for somebody to say, hey, this is, in the middle of a class with everyone watching, was really brave, but so necessary, because if they hadn't done that, we would have continued that conversation. More people would have probably internalized that poor mentality, and none of us would have learned what we learned in that moment. So it is really important to own your own biases and check others as well in a gracious way. So those are the tips that I had for you all today. And I'm happy to answer any questions about my work or the things that I shared today. Oh, I see, Elizabeth. Okay, what are some tips to check your own biases? Yeah, so I think the way that and again, everybody's different because you have your own world and you are your own mind. But for me, the first thing that I do is anytime that I've made an assumption about somebody, I ask myself why I did that. It's not enough to just make the assumption, mess up and be like, oh, sorry, I assumed that. No. You have to actually go back and do the work of, why did I think that? Why did my mind assume that? And then go down layers and layers of where that could have been. And it takes work. The second thing that I would say about checking your own biases is there are some really great resources. And I can send a link after this, but there are some, I think it's Harvard that has an actual test that you could take. And biases go both ways, it could be that you have a preferred, for example, when I took the bias test, I was more biased towards being overly nice and overly catering to people who have disabilities. And that's because I grew up around that. And so my biases are always like, you're not making this accessible, you're not. But again, that goes to the other way. And then there's the other bias where like, you just don't acknowledge it at all because it's so much out of your sphere. So I recommend taking a couple of those tests to check your biases. I recommend just asking yourself, why did I assume that? Why, constantly journaling, reflecting. And then the third one would be read. There are so many great books out there right now, depending on what bias you want to tackle. I talked about disability bias, but racial biases are really big. Gender biases are really big. And so there's a lot of literature out there that you could read. And that even just brings things to your peripherals that you're like, I didn't even know that was a bias, right? Book recommendations. Yes. Oh my gosh. I love that you asked that because I was just looking at a screenshot. So there's a couple of books that I would recommend. The first is Caste, and I can share a link to that as well. But I love that book. There's also White Supremacy and Me, which has been a really big book about racial bias. I can't really think off the top of my head right now about a socioeconomic bias book, but There Goes the Hood is a good one that talks about gentrification and can allow you to kind of understand that issue. But I'll put my contact information. If you have a certain topic you want to read on, I'm happy to pass on some resources.
Lina, thanks for this. This is, I love these tips of do's and don'ts. I'm kind of curious for the students on the call and the students who are going to be watching this later. You're a Suffolk alum, and I know you are very active as a student. What kinds of experiences could you encourage students to get involved with on Suffolk's campus that could help them kind of develop some of these cross-cultural communication skills?
Oh my gosh, absolutely. So I did the most while I was at Suffolk. I was like, I'm going to do it all. And that would be something that I highly recommend. Like, try everything at least once, like try everything. I think because I was able to try everything at a very young age in college, I was able to see what I didn't like and what I did like. And that was really, really beneficial, which was outside of my class, right? Like not even related to my degree. So I did the Center for Community Engagement. I did Alternative Spring Break, which that alone was an amazing experience because it not only allowed me to go to El Salvador, to understand a whole different country that I continued going to even after graduation with that same professor, and doing the same work, right? Like there's where I found my passion. But it allowed me to go to places like Denver, who you would have never thought, like Denver, what do you think about when you think about Denver? But it was actually like it had the highest rate of child homelessness. And that was a really great, again, culture shock for me because I'm in Denver. When I think Denver, I think wealth and hiking. That's all I think about. And so it really allowed me to check that assumption, right? Like, why did I assume that that's what Denver was? And let me educate myself on the actual population. I also got to go to Mississippi, which was amazing. And I also got to go to Texas, which is where I experienced my first actual discrimination, right? Like here I am volunteering with Habitat, having white people bring me food because I'm a volunteer and simultaneously discriminate against me because at that time I wasn't a citizen. And so in our prayer, they were like, let's thank God for citizens. And again, it was like such a cultural shock and a huge learning opportunity to understand what the South is like, right? Like that was my first exposure because in Boston, we live in a little bubble and I don't know where our students are from, but that was a really, really transformative experience. So highly recommend anything that allows you to travel. That is, one of my biggest regrets is not taking the Prague trip that Suffolk used to offer. I don't know if they still offer it, but any traveling outside of Boston that Suffolk offers, please take it. And then the second thing that I would say is all of the student groups. It allowed me to really meet different people, like the even things that I would have never tried. I was saying this to Suffolk students yesterday, but I didn't really ride a bike until I got to Suffolk and bought a bike and became the president of SU Bikes. And I was like, who am I? But that also allowed me to establish a community that I would have never met, right? Like all of these people who are commuting via bike to Suffolk, and they were so different from me. But it was such a beautiful experience. And again, like we were able to bring our different cultures and they, at the same time, connect through our own culture of biking, which was amazing. Same thing with the hip hop dance group, same thing with the affinity group. So I would definitely say the diversity office was amazing. Again, Latina immigrant, like super conservative life before Suffolk, and being part of the diversity services office, like really allowed me to see what LGBTQ was, and really allowed me to immerse myself in that, own that, and become an ally. And one of the most recent learnings that I've had is that just because I think I'm an ally doesn't mean I'm an ally. I am only an ally if the community deems me so. And so that was another really great learning experience that I had through all of the Suffolk extracurriculars.
Do we have any other questions? Sorry, Lina, I just cut you off. I'm not seeing any right now. But Lina, do you have any sort of contact info that you'd like to pass along to the students? You can put your information there as well in the chat.
Awesome, we'll do that.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for being here. That was an amazing stories. I just loved hearing that because that's like what I'm passionate about as well. So I have a question to pose to you guys. If you just want to type it in the chat. So what do we learn is cross-cultural communication? I'll wait a minute more for people to start answering, and then okay, Elizabeth said building relationships and listening. 100%. It's so important to build those relationships and to really listen to those people. And when it comes to listening, it's not just like what you may think is listening, but listening to like this undertones, like what are people really going through? Like, pay attention to their body language. I know Destiny said that as well. So like pay attention to how they're reacting to certain things, because sometimes people don't want to say if they are offended by something. Just from my experience, I know like I haven't always been comfortable saying that either. Okay, so Adam, okay. Educating ourselves and lead with questions, being curious rather than assuming. 100, 1000%, like that is an amazing definition. Yes, don't assume, like nothing is really a positive bias or positive assumption. Because I know like from being part of the Asian American community and being like, South Asian, people will be like, oh, you're supposed to be just really good at math, and it's like, what's wrong with that, right? But there is something wrong with it because you're putting this like whole role on me that I didn't even know that I needed to fill, but now I think I have to fill. So nothing is really a positive assumption. So just ask a question, be nice about it. And most people are just willing to like answer and like educate you and things like that. Mark says, be confident and know what you want. Yeah, 100%. Know what you want to get out of the situation. And our Destiny talked about that a lot. Whatever experience you're going into, have an intention, set that, and then run with it, because when you have an intention, you know exactly what goals you're trying to fulfill. So yeah, awesome. I love those definitions. Let's move on to the next slide. Okay, so what's the importance of cross-cultural communication? We talked about what it is, but what does it actually accomplish, and why is it so important in today's world? I'll wait for people to put that in chat as well. I'll start defining it and then I'll start reading off the chat. Oh, Elizabeth said, you learn what you didn't know and needed to learn from others. Yeah, definitely. That's like so important to like recognize that you don't know what you need to learn a lot of times, especially if you're from like a certain background. Being an immigrant myself too, like I didn't know that like certain biases existed because of like the community I came from. There weren't so many different cultures. Like it was one culture, right? I wasn't like Bangladesh. I just knew the Bangladeshi culture. There weren't a lot of immigrants or anything like that. So I didn't know that I had to learn about other people's cultures and like what other people go through. I had never experienced that. So yeah, just be open to thinking like, I may have other things to learn. Adam said to build inclusive communities where everyone actually feels welcome and able to active members of their community. So yeah, people have to feel like they are included. They have to feel like they can be active. A lot of discriminations people don't want to speak up about, and that hinders them, right? That'll hinder like their school ability. I know I like recently talked about like Asian American racism at the school assembly at and we talked about how like some of the students, like because nothing was being done about the racism they were facing, they weren't able to get their schoolwork done properly. They were constantly thinking about those things. So think about like, you know, what impact it will have on other people, or changing your behavior will also have on other people. Let's move to the next slide. Okay, awesome. So these are just some of the takeaways from today. Anyone else, like if you guys have any takeaways, feel free to drop it in the chat or unmute yourself after I just go over them. But these are things you guys have said. So listen to understand. You know, when you're listening to someone, don't think of it as like, don't go into it in a defensive manner. Like listen to really be like, you know what, I might have things to address here. Let me listen openly, even if it is hurtful, and it sometimes can be. You know, I've been in a situation like that, and I'm sure so many people have. But if you take it and close off and it's like, you know, that person thinks because I have biases, I'm a horrible person. Like that's just, you know, that's not true. They're calling it out because they care to call it out in the first place. Like if I call you out and you're like someone close to me, it's because I care about you. I want you to learn from that situation, right? So don't close off in that way. Listen to really take in what the other person is thinking and then evaluate your behavior. Avoid stereotyping. So when you're like making posts or just communicating across different cultures and things like that, don't immediately assume, you know, this, like I know this culture, like let's use a math example again, because it's really easy. Oh, they like math, like let me post these math things and they're gonna they're gonna join this program or whatever, you know. Don't immediately just like take whatever you've heard. Just try to avoid that as much as possible, because no one likes being stereotyped. It's just harmful in the long run, and just overall. And then respect differences. You know, different cultures tend to go about things different ways. I guess I could, so as like a Muslim woman, I don't wear hijab, but like a lot of people that I know do wear hijabs, right? And like right now we know there's a ban in France on hijabs, and something that I always talk about is that like respect those differences. Just because you don't choose to like cover your head, just because you don't choose to live in that way, does not mean that the other person did not. So like don't assume someone is oppressed, don't assume what someone is like, you know, going through, because like I'm Muslim and my parents are super religious, but they've never forced me to wear a hijab, right? And everyone I know has never been like, oh yeah, I'm being forced to wear a hijab. I know there's people that have taken it off or chose to put it back on after like they got much older. My own mom has, you know, worn it after she had me, and much later than that, not before she was married or anything like that, and she was never forced into it. She chose that, right? So just to think about life in that way. You know, it's okay to have differences. Differences are what makes us so like great and like able to share and learn from each other. So respect that other people will not live life the same way that you do. Build self-awareness. I know Lina talked a lot about that, just like reading books, Googling is so important. I talk about this a lot, and I'm like, you know, it's not my job as like a POC or part of a marginalized group to like explain to you what I'm going through all the time, right? You shouldn't always reach out to specific people and always be like, you should talk about this, because people get tired. But Google does have a lot of resources. A lot of different schools have resources. Suffolk has, you know, offices where you can go to and learn about these things. So go to those people that are making themselves readily available like that. You know, don't always just ask like the one friend, because they may be feeling really down. They may be, you know, going through something, talking about that issue, and may be traumatizing for them. So just be aware of that. Google issues. Also be flexible. So once you are called out, just apologize. That's like my main thing about that. When I was doing that assembly, this was like the most proudest moment I've ever had. This kid, like, he reached out to me, private messaged me, and he was like, you know, when I was in elementary school, I realized that I said a lot of racist things, and I didn't know that those things were racist. But I'm so sorry that I put this on you guys and like put this on other people, and I'm gonna work on that. You know, I didn't ask for an apology. I didn't even know I never called him out to begin with, right? I just was talking about different things people experience and how they can be racist. But the fact that this person took that time, you know, as a high schooler, to apologize to me privately, that just meant a lot, right? So think about that. Like when you recognize that, when you learn a new thing and you recognize maybe I've been biased towards this person, go reach out and apologize to them. It'll like make their day. It'll help you a lot grow as a person, but it'll also help them feel like more safe around you as well. And the last thing is ask questions. We know like Lina and Destiny, they're like super open. You guys can always reach out to them, they said. And we're here at Suffolk Votes ambassadors as well. And Suffolk has the Office for like Inclusion and Diversity. So also reach out to them and just ask questions. If you don't know something, go and be like, all right, this is what I don't know. I feel like this is I've done something wrong, or, you know, or maybe I don't know what I'm doing wrong. Help me. And people will help you. People are open to helping you. They want to help you learn. Yeah, awesome. I see some things in the chat. You learn what you didn't know. You need to, oh, no, never mind. Let's go. Learn how to fish out the implicit messages. Yeah, definitely think about the implicit messages. And when you feel something's wrong, ask your peers, talk about it, and be able to learn from the experience. 100%. Talk to people, talk to your friends, talk to your family, anyone you feel comfortable with. And Lina has put the implicit bias test from Harvard. I definitely suggest everyone take that. I'm going to go take that. Thank you so much for that resource as well. And yeah, I hope you guys continue to learn. And when you guys think about launching your own campaigns or being organizers, you take these lessons with you and use them to the best of your ability. So thank you guys so much for being here. Thank you so much, Lina and Destiny, for being here as well and speaking to our students. We really, really appreciate you. For our next program, just follow us everywhere at Suffolk Votes. And you can email us at suffolkcc@gmail.com, or you can DM us. So we're pretty active on Instagram, so we'll get back to you. And thank you so much again for being here.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you all so
for the
much.
opportunity, guys. Nice meeting each and every one of you. Best of luck.
Thank you.